Okay, I want you to imagine stepping into a boardroom, and right across the table sits a 19-year-old. She is wearing this black, you know, Steve Jobs style turtleneck.
Right, the classic Silicon Valley uniform.
Exactly. And she is speaking in this impossibly deep, booming baritone voice. Plus, she's staring at you with these massive, completely unblinking blue eyes. It is, well, it's almost hypnotic.
Oh, totally. And while she has you locked in that stare, she promises this absolute medical miracle.
Yeah, a tiny device that she claims can run hundreds of complex medical tests from just a single painless drop of blood.
It really is the ultimate startup pitch. I mean, you're promising to save lives, get rid of the fear of needles, and completely disrupt a massive global industry, all wrapped up in this incredibly magnetic persona.
And the craziest part, the most powerful people in the world fell for it completely. So today we are taking a deep dive into the story of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos.
And we are not just looking at the past, we're getting into a massive, jaw-dropping new development happening right now in 2026.
Right, because what happens when that exact same pitch is being made today, but wrapped in modern artificial intelligence buzzwords and secretly tied to the exact same people who pulled off the biggest medical fraud in history?
Yeah, to understand how this sequel is even possible, we really need to unpack the mechanics of the original illusion. Look at the background, the actual science, and the wild legal loopholes.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have a stack of investigative articles, court documents, documentaries, everything. But where do we even begin with someone like Elizabeth Holmes?
I think we have to start with her psychology, right?
Mhm.
Like her background. She was born in 1984 into a pretty wealthy Washington, D.C. family. And there is this deep history of massive industry in her bloodline.
Oh, like the East Empire, right.
Exactly. Her
Okay.
great-great-great-grandfather founded the Fleischmann's Yeast Empire. So she grows up with this lingering family pride, but also this intense, burning desire to get back to those days of massive wealth and influence.
Well, the background material actually highlighted something I found absolutely staggering. Her father was a vice president at Enron.
Yeah, I mean, you can't make that up.
Right. Growing up in a household tied to one of the most infamous corporate frauds in American history, it honestly feels like foreshadowing written for a movie. And she was like intensely ambitious from day one.
Oh, definitely. When people asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up, she didn't say president or an astronaut. She literally said she wanted to be a billionaire.
Just straight to the point. So that ambition takes her to Stanford in 2002 to study chemical engineering. And then the next summer, she goes over to Singapore.
Right, to intern at a genome institute during the SARS outbreak, and her job there involved testing blood samples the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
And it was syringes.
Which was a huge problem for her because she had a really profound phobia of needles.
Exactly. So she comes back to Stanford, and at 19 years old, she just drops out. She
Wow.
takes her tuition money and starts Theranos.
And the pitch was so elegant, right? You just prick your finger, squeeze out one tiny drop of blood into this little container they called a nanotainer, pop it into a desktop box called the Edison, and boom, it instantly runs hundreds of tests.
It sounds perfect, but there is a massive catch. The pitch completely ignores basic human physiology.
Okay, wait, this is a crucial point. Why didn't the medical experts stop her right there before she even got started?
Well, the thing is, they actually tried to. She took this idea to Dr. Phyllis Gardner, who was an expert medicine professor right there at Stanford. And Dr. Gardner basically told her, look, this idea is physically impossible.
So, to you listening right now, a drop of blood probably just seems like, a smaller version of a big vial of blood, but biologically that's not true, is it?
No, it's entirely different. When a phlebotomist draws blood from a vein in your arm, they're tapping into a clean, uniform river of blood.
But with a finger prick.
With a finger prick, you are forcibly crushing the cells in your finger just to get fluid to the surface. You aren't
Mhm.
just getting nice, clean capillary blood, you are squeezing out interstitial tissue fluid.
Which is basically the liquid that just sort of floats around surrounding your cells.
Exactly. And that tissue fluid mixes with the blood and completely contaminates the sample. Plus, the physical trauma of literally squeezing the finger causes red blood cells to burst open. It's a process called hemolysis.
Oh, wow. So the cells just explode.
Yeah, and when they burst, they release potassium and other chemicals right into the sample, which completely skews the chemistry.
It's like the difference between scooping a cup of water from a nice flowing river versus, I don't know, scooping water from a muddy puddle that people have been stepping in. You just cannot run 200 precise diagnostic tests on a ruptured, contaminated puddle of tissue fluid.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And Dr. Gardner and other medical professionals explicitly explained all these physical limitations to Holmes.
But she didn't listen. She didn't adjust the science at all.
Not even a little bit. She just bypassed the actual scientists entirely. She took her grand vision straight to the dean of the engineering school, Channing Robertson.
And engineering is very different from biology.
Completely. She turns on the charm, paints this vivid, emotional picture of a world without needles, and just totally wins him over.
Because, I mean, if you can't convince the pathologist, you just build an illusion that's powerful enough to convince the engineers, and more importantly, the venture capitalists.
Right. Channing Robertson became her first board member, and he basically opened the doors to all that Silicon Valley money. And to make sure she secured that money, she actively crafted herself into the next Steve Jobs.
Which is where that persona comes in. The daily uniform of black turtlenecks was a very calculated homage, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And the unblinking stare. That was a known psychological tactic used to project absolute sincerity and dominance in a room.
I read that people who knew her from high school were totally shocked when they suddenly heard her speaking in that deep, fake baritone voice.
Yeah, she intentionally lowered her voice. It was all designed to command authority in these heavily male-dominated venture capital boardrooms.
But here's the thing. Maintaining this shiny media persona while secretly running a rapidly failing laboratory it's definitely a two-person job. She couldn't keep her own employees in line while simultaneously trying to charm magazine editors.
No, she needed someone on the inside to instill absolute compliance. And that is when she brings in Ramesh Balwani. Everyone called him Sonny.
Sunny Balwani. Who exactly was he?
So Sonny was a software entrepreneur who made millions during the dot-com boom. And he was 19 years older than Holmes. They actually met when she was just 18 on a trip to Beijing.
And they had a secret relationship, right?
Yeah, he was married at the time they met, but they eventually became romantically involved, moved in together, and kept the entire relationship a total secret from the investors. And then by 2009, he officially joins Theranos as the chief operating officer.
With absolutely zero medical background.
Zero. But he quickly became the feared enforcer inside the company. I mean, he literally monitored employees on security cameras just to track their hours.
That is incredibly paranoid.
It gets worse. Departments were heavily siloed. Everyone had to sign these crazy, aggressive non-disclosure agreements. And the scientists were actively pitted against each other. It was a culture of extreme paranoia, completely designed to make sure nobody could see the big picture.
Which was that the technology was a total failure.
Exactly.
So while Sonny locks down the lab, Holmes is out building what has to be the most absurdly overqualified, yet medically unqualified, board of directors in corporate history.
It really is wild when you look at the names. Former Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger and George Shultz. Future Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. Billionaire Rupert Murdoch.
Brilliant men, sure, in the realm of geopolitics and media. But not a single one of them was a medical pathologist.
Right. What's fascinating here is the psychological phenomenon of the illusionary truth effect. The venture capitalists and the media saw all these heavy-hitting names on the board, and they just blindly assumed that someone, somewhere, must have verified the actual science.
They even built a completely fake, incredibly futuristic-looking lab specifically to fool Vice President Joe Biden when he visited.
Yeah, Biden walked right through it and called it the laboratory of the future. He had absolutely no idea that the shiny machines he was looking at were essentially just very expensive paperweights.
But, you know, having a famous board of directors cannot rewrite the laws of physics. The Edison machine was fundamentally flawed from the ground up.
They were basically trying to take the capabilities of a massive room-sized hospital laboratory and shrink it down into a box the size of a microwave.
Yeah, think of it like trying to cram a massive automated car factory into a shoebox. You've got welding torches, robotic arms, and paint sprayers all jammed in right next to each other.
Exactly. The heat for the torches would dry the paint way too fast. The sparks would fry the computers. It's chaos.
Right. And inside the Edison machine, you literally had a centrifuge spinning violently right next to super delicate optical sensors. You had thermal controllers heating up to incubate samples, and the heat would literally melt the nearby adhesives holding the machine together. The components just constantly interfered with each other.
And then there was the second massive physics problem, the blood volume itself. Because that single drop of contaminated finger-prick blood was just way too small to run through the machine, Theranos had to secretly dilute the blood samples just to increase the volume.
Which is crazy. Diluting a microsample to make it fit a machine is like taking a single drop of blue dye, dropping it into an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and then asking a scientist to determine the exact shade of the original drop. It just completely destroys the integrity of the data.
It absolutely does. But they had signed this massive, highly publicized contract with Walgreens to run actual blood tests on the public.
Yeah.
So to handle that volume, they resorted to outright fraud.
How do they actually fake it?
They started secretly purchasing traditional third-party blood testing machines from established companies like Siemens. They pulled these large machines apart, modified them to accept their heavily diluted finger prick samples, and ran the tests in secret basement laboratories, completely hidden away from the investors.
Wow, and this is really where the story shifts, right? It goes from a classic Silicon Valley exaggeration to a terrifying public health nightmare. We are talking about real-world medical data points that doctors use to make life or death decisions.
Well, the human cost was very real. There was a health-conscious physician who actually took a Theranos test and was misdiagnosed as pre-diabetic.
A doctor was misdiagnosed.
Yeah, and because he was a doctor, he immediately got a second opinion and found out the Theranos test was entirely wrong. But imagine an average person getting that news.
And it wasn't just diabetes. Their testing for infectious diseases was terrifyingly inaccurate. The data showed that a person with syphilis had a roughly 30% chance of getting a negative result from Theranos.
Exactly. They were sending people back out into the world, actively infected, telling them they were perfectly healthy.
That is just unconscionable. And naturally, the cognitive dissonance inside the company became unbearable for the actual scientists working there.
Yeah. Which brings us to Ian Gibbons. He was a brilliant 67-year-old head chemist at Theranos, and he absolutely knew the technology was a fraud.
Right, because he was working directly on it.
Right. And in 2013, he was subpoenaed to testify in a patent lawsuit involving the company, so he was completely trapped. He knew if he told the truth under oath, he would destroy the company and face the ruinous wrath of Sonny and the Theranos legal team.
But he was a scientist. He couldn't just lie under oath about the data.
No, he couldn't. The pressure was just unimaginable for him. Tragically, the night before he was scheduled to give his testimony, he took his own life.
And Holmes's reaction to this was just chilling. She barely acknowledged his death. She immediately had her people call his widow, not to offer condolences, but to aggressively demand that all confidential Theranos property be returned immediately.
It's incredibly cold. But the sheer weight of all these lies finally broke the silence inside the company. A few brave individuals just couldn't stomach the fraud anymore.
Like Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz.
Yes. These were two young, junior employees. And Tyler's involvement is especially dramatic because his grandfather was George Shultz.
The former Secretary of State on the board?
Exactly. George Shultz was one of Holmes's biggest champions. Tyler actually tried to warn his grandfather about what was really going on in the labs, but the illusion was so incredibly strong that George Shultz chose to believe Elizabeth Holmes over his own flesh and blood.
That really shows you the power of the reality distortion field she built. But despite all that, and despite threats of ruinous lawsuits from aggressive private investigators, Chung, Schultz, and a few others leaked the internal documents to Wall Street Journal investigative reporter John Kerry Rue.
And that was the beginning of the end. In October 2015, Kerry Rue dropped the bombshell article exposing that Theranos was totally struggling with its technology and outright faking its results.
So what does this all mean for Holmes? How did she react when the article hit?
With that signature, unblinking denial. She went on national television, totally calm, and recited this clearly rehearsed line. She said, "This is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world."
Unbelievable. But the regulatory agencies finally stepped in, right?
Yeah, the FDA and the SEC cracked down hard. Holmes was banned from operating a lab. Walgreens immediately ripped the wellness centers out of all their stores. That massive $9 billion valuation just vanished overnight.
Oof, gone.
Gone. Holmes was eventually indicted, tried, and convicted of multiple counts of wire fraud against her investors. She was sentenced to over 11 years in a federal prison in Texas, while Sunny Balwani received nearly 13 years.
And just to bring the timeline completely up to date for you listening, and we're just stating this as a factual update from the timeline impartially, as of January 2026, Holmes has formally applied for a sentence commutation from President Trump.
Yeah. Whether she actually gets released early definitely remains to be seen. But one thing is for sure, she certainly isn't just sitting idle in her cell while she waits.
Which brings us to the sequel. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because while she's been incarcerated, she's actually continued writing and filing new medical patents.
Yes, and this is the massive development unfolding right now. Her partner and husband, Billy Evans, who is a billionaire hotel heir, have quietly launched a brand new startup called Humans.
Humans. And the pitch for this new startup is incredibly familiar, isn't it?
Almost identical. They are promising a revolutionary new way to screen for cancer and major diseases by scanning bodily fluids like blood, saliva, or urine.
But they aren't selling a bulky desktop box this time.
No, no. This time they have wrapped the venture in the absolute most lucrative buzzword of our current era, artificial intelligence.
Of course. So how is it supposed to work?
The claim is that they will use high-energy lasers to scan the fluids, feed that incredibly complex data into a deep learning AI model, and catch the very faint signals of disease in a matter of seconds.
I mean, it literally sounds like Theranos 2.0, just with a modern software wrapper. But wait, how is it even legally possible for a convicted fraudster who has a 10-year SEC ban from serving as a director of a public company to orchestrate a new medical startup from inside a federal prison cell?
That is the million-dollar question. And the answer is the structure of private equity. The SEC ban applies to public companies, right? Companies that have rigorous, transparent reporting requirements.
But a private company.
The private company, especially one funded independently by massive private wealth like her billionaire husband, operates in a complete legal dark box. Holmes can allegedly advise the team, file patents, and guide the entire vision without ever once putting her name on an executive letterhead.
So she can just pull the strings through this legal loophole, completely shielded from public scrutiny. Wow. Now, I think the immediate reaction from anyone hearing this is to just assume this is another complete fabrication. But I really want to dig into the actual science they're claiming to use this time. Because unlike the magical fake Edison machine, the technology they're pointing to today in 2026 isn't entirely fiction, is it?
No, it's not. The underlying science they are talking about is real. It's called Raman spectroscopy, named after the physicist C.V. Raman.
Okay, so how does Raman spectroscopy actually work?
Think of it like looking for a highly detailed chemical fingerprint. When you shoot a laser into a fluid, most of the light particles bounce off perfectly straight. But a very, very tiny fraction of those light particles interacts with the molecular vibrations of the fluid itself, and they actually change energy.
And that energy shift changes how the light scatters.
Yes, that energy shift scatters the light in a very specific, predictable pattern.
So essentially, every molecule, whether it's glucose or a protein or even a cancer biomarker, creates a unique scatter pattern, like a unique barcode of light.
Precisely like a barcode. Historically, the big problem was that biological fluids, like blood or saliva, are so incredibly complex that reading those millions of overlapping barcodes all at once was just nearly impossible for human scientists.
But today, deep learning AI models are perfectly suited for that exact type of pattern recognition.
Right. AI can instantly analyze millions of overlapping light patterns to find the specific, faint scatter signature of a disease.
And legitimate scientists are already doing this right now, aren't they?
They absolutely are. Dr. Victor Vaculescu's teams, along with researchers over at the Beijing Medical University, they are running actual peer-reviewed clinical trials using AI and Raman spectroscopy.
And the results are impressive.
Very impressive. They have identified melanoma cells with over 99% accuracy and severe bacterial infections with nearly 98% accuracy. So the science of using AI to analyze a drop of fluid is actually becoming a reality.
So the physics are finally catching up to the fantasy that Holmes was selling a decade ago. Legitimate global breakthroughs are happening. But the fact that this human startup is attempting to commercialize this space while being secretly influenced by the architect of the Theranos fraud, I mean, that creates a massive crisis of trust.
It's a huge problem.
I have to ask you listening right now, knowing the history of the fabricated Siemens machines, the diluted blood, and the devastating impact on real patients, would you trust a medical AI company funded by Billy Evans and secretly guided by Elizabeth Holmes? Even if the broader scientific field is making real progress, the fundamental trust required for healthcare is just completely shattered here.
It really is. And, you know, this whole scenario perfectly illustrates the Gartner hype cycle.
What is that?
It's a classic technology maturity curve. Basically, almost every major technological innovation begins with a massive, overhyped bubble where the promises completely outpace the actual physics. Then the bubble inevitably bursts, causing this period of intense disillusionment.
Like Theranos crashing and burning.
Exactly.
But then, a decade or so later, the hard, quiet science actually catches up and finally delivers on the original promise.
Man, we have watched this story evolve from a 19-year-old's impossible dream to a deeply unethical cover-up to a multi-billion-dollar implosion. And now we are looking at an AI sequel operating through these private wealth loopholes.
It really leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to mull over.
What's that?
Did Elizabeth Holmes actually predict the exact future of AI fluid testing, and she just lied because she was 10 years too early for the physics to match her vision? Or are we, as a society, just so helplessly addicted to the fantasy of the lone genius in a black turtleneck that we are perfectly willing to fund the exact same illusion twice?
That is the question. The next time someone locks eyes with you, totally unblinking, and promises a miracle that will change the world,
Hmm.
maybe ask to see the peer-reviewed data first.